y'all, welcome back to my shop. I love thread chasing, and it's just a lot of fun, very zen. I've done a few recent videos on it, and this is a kind of a continuation of that, but I want to spend a little more time talking about wood. I was talking to somebody the other day on the telephone that called to ask for advice on some thread chasing issues, and they were saying, well, they were having a hard time cutting threads in silver maple, and they couldn't cut threads in oak. It's like, well, yeah, of course, those are not suitable woods. But what's obvious to me that, studied this and been at it a while, it's not obvious to somebody that's just recently bought some thread chasers or bought them a while back and haven't used them and now thinking about getting in to use them. So let's talk a little bit about wood. Before you get started with hand thread chasing, I want you to know that some woods are more suitable than others. Some woods will just frustrate your efforts. I want to share with you what you want to know about wood for thread chasing in order that you can be successful. If you haven't been successful with your thread chasing, perhaps it's about the wood. Keep watching. Alright, the best woods for thread chasing tend to be very dense and close grained. They tend to have a high specific gravity. Now, by specific gravity, we're talking about the relative weight of wood to water. For example, a cubic foot of water weighs 64 pounds. That's a specific gravity of 1.0. So if a wood's got a specific gravity of 1.0, it's going to sink in water. But that's only one of the factors, is the specific gravity, the hardness of it. So let's look at some more information. Domestically, there's just not a lot of wood that really lends itself to reliably cutting good threads. If you're skilled, some of them you can have pretty good luck with. I think I mentioned it before, some of y'all watch some of my videos, I've had pretty good luck with Bradford pear. I've had pretty good luck with dogwood. But sometimes it varies from tree to tree or even branch to branch in the same tree. But you got to disavow yourself of the notion that you're going to be able to thread chase soft maple. I've never tried hard maple. I've heard some people have some reasonable success with it. But there's very few domestic woods that lend itself to hand thread chasing at 16 threads per inch. And maybe as you move up to 10 threads per inch, a few more, a little bit better. But it's hard to chase threads that are 10 threads per inch. I've discussed that in an earlier video. So some of the wood, the one that I was pleasantly surprised is mountain laurel. I've been able to cut threads down to 20 threads per inch, which is very fine. The recent video I did on a boxwood box, boy, you can chase that down to 20 threads per inch and does real well. But the kinds of woods that do very well, such as African blackwood, really will cost you your firstborn. I mean, it's just very, very expensive. There are some other, and that's these blanks that they make, I forget, some kind of bells for clarinet, I think, clarinet bells. Blackwood, if you can get those, they're very nice. You tend to have to get an exotic wood. And the problem is which exotic, because some of them work real well, some of the time, just like domestic woods. But there's more exotic woods that are suitable for reliably thread chasing at 20 threads per inch and maybe more easily at 16 threads per inch. So for example, here's a piece of wood called jobilo. I can cut threads at 16 threads per inch. Once you start getting finer than that, down to 20, you start having some problems with it. If you use cocobolo, you can cut threads sometimes real fine threads. But cocobolo's got some other issues. I did a video a while back on toxic wood. You might check that out because they say there's two kinds of turners: those that are allergic to cocobolo and those that are going to be allergic to cocobolo. One of my favorites is Mopani. Sometimes you can get that reasonably priced at a store or a woodworking vendor. Very, very fine wood. But then there's other woods that's, here's one, Bocote. I've had good luck with Bocote, but I've heard other people say sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So again, it depends on that particular stick. Now when you start getting these exotics, one of the things you got to keep in mind is normally they're covered in wax or certainly sealed, the ends are sealed, and you got to treat them as green. And that means you've got to turn them twice. You got to rough turn them and let them stabilize and maybe move a little bit. You're not going to be successful threading wood that's not dry, so we have a tendency to take our blocks of wood and rough turn them to make sure they dry, kind of similar to a twice turned bowl. The good news is generally for these exotics, they are so tightly grained and dense, the ones suitable for thread chasing, they don't move a whole lot. I did one out of green Bacote and it worked just fine and it didn't move at all. So I was pleasantly surprised, and I was just playing with thread chasing and I made a little box and the threads held up. But then you get some other exotic woods that won't work. The nice woods, they just don't lend themselves to thread chasing. They might be heavy, they might be dense. Here's a piece of ebony, Brazilian ebony. You'd think that would be a suitable wood, but it's not. It tends to be a little coarse. Very heavy, very thick, it's pretty, but it just doesn't hold threads well for hand thread chasing. Although if you use a jig, you know, most hardwoods will work, exotic or domestic, if you're using a threading jig. Here's a piece of catalox. I've been able to thread down to 20 threads per inch with catalox. It's generally has been reasonably priced in the past. But then you'll get something like marble wood, which is a very pretty wood, but it is too coarse. You just can't thread chase marble wood. I think it's got an interlocking grain, but it's just doesn't lend itself to thread chasing. But you know, there's a couple of other pieces to the puzzle. In a recent video, I had a clip where I showed how I made screw chucks out of pine, plain, ordinary construction white pine in the U.S. Cut 16 threads per inch. Not a little harder to do that than it is 10 threads per inch. But I use these and hand chase them to make a screw chuck to put a blank in there where or a box where I'm finishing the bottom. Now this is side grain, and the difference when you make a box, normally you're going to make a box with in spindle orientation because the wood will tend to move evenly as it dries, and with seasonal variations where it might absorb some moisture, the box is going to the top should reliably fit. When you start cutting side grain, there's two issues. Number one, just like turning a bowl, as it's coming around, you're hitting end grain and side grain, and we know end grain is harder. So as a result, you're going to have a little harder time getting even threads with side grain wood of any kind. The other issue is if you make a box out of side grain wood, bowl orientation, you're going to have seasonal changes where it's going to warp or move just a little bit, and it's going to tend to go oval. That said, I can hand thread chase 10 threads per inch, and it'll work just great for what it's intended to. A one-time deal to make a screw chuck, and it's so fast and easy because the wood is so soft, so easy. You get it close, and one or two tries to adjust it, and you can get it fitting to hold that box bottom without any problem. So there's that. The best woods tend to have very fine, uniform texture with relatively small diameter cells. Fine texture means it has small, closely spaced pores. Now, this can be kind of tricky. So, for example, if we look at this example of a piece of oak and a piece of Osage orange, they're going to look somewhat similar superficially. But oak, you can't hand thread chase. Osage orange, generally you can. Most woods that are suitable for thread chasing tend to be what they call
diffuse porous.
That the rings are not readily observable. And here's some examples of some of them. There's ebony, Burmese blackwood, catalox, Bacote, zapote, holly, of course boxwood, and Bradford pear are just some of them. Ring porous wood is a hardwood in which relatively large pores are concentrated in the early wood. Early wood is the wood formed early in the growing season, and distinctly smaller pores are formed in the late wood, that is, wood growing later in the season. Early wood is less dense in structure with large, thin wall cells for good sap transportation, whereas late wood has smaller cells with thicker walls that add strength to the tree. Examples of that are ash, chestnut, and oak. So why is it that Osage orange is ring porous and looks very similar to the structure of, well, if I can just keep up with these blocks of wood. How is it that Osage orange that looks so much like oak with its prominent rings can still hand thread chase? And I believe it's because the differences between the early growth rings and the later growth rings have similar density. Changes in density wreak havoc with thread chasing. Fine-grained diffuse porous exotics, such as some of them that I've showed you, tend to work very well with thread chasing, and that's the boxwood. Other examples are lignum vitae, or this Argentine version of lignum vitae, Palo Santo, that I got from Argentina by way of my friend Emiliano Actbal. And the rings are prominent, but it's very, very tight grained, the high specific gravity. I believe this will sink in water. Many rosewoods are suitable for thread chasing, but not all. Yucatan rosewood, which grows in a desert area, I haven't had real good luck with, but Patagonian rosewood, I have had good luck with. Some domestic woods can do well with practice, and woods that I've had real good success with, again, are that Osage orange. I've had real good luck with dogwood. I've had real good luck with Bradford pear on any number of boxes. Another wood that I've had some, this is Bradford pear, dogwood, and this one is, I think, persimmon, but it was stabilized chemically, which means it was infused with resin, so otherwise it would not have threaded well at all. Another domestic wood that I got from my friend Reed Gray is mountain mahogany. It's not a true mahogany, but it's an extremely dense hardwood. Mountain mahogany has a specific gravity of 1.2, which means it'll definitely sink in water. Another wood, I don't have a sample handy, that I've had good luck, here it is, I've had some luck with, is mountain laurel, if you can catch it before it deteriorates, because it is very slow growing. It seems to have these medullary rays, but it still seems to thread well. And then there's holly. Holly is a very tight-grained, fine-grained wood. And I've been successful at hand thread chasing this to 16 TPI. Unlike many others, though, when I go to a coarser thread like 12 or 10, I tend to get some crumbling. So I'm not sure what, but 16 it works well. That's a little bit about wood. How about non-wood? Let me give you some other examples of things that are non-wood that you can thread chase. Number one, there's in effect plastic. This is a blank I made out of HDPE, which is, I think, I can't remember what it's number one. I think it's number 2 symbol. And specifically, this is Pringle cans and milk jugs that I melted together, but it threads very well. Here's a blank of plastic that was sent to me by a manufacturer of plastic products that used the scraps and made some turning blanks out of it. They sent me one to play with, and it worked out very well. Corian, obviously it doesn't have any grain structure, and that threads very well, although it's kind of nasty stuff to smell with the powder and all, but it does thread very well. So I talked about domestic woods that do thread chase well, specifically dogwood, Bradford pear, mountain laurel, mountain mahogany, and Osage orange. I'm sure there are others, but those are the ones that I've had good success with. There are others that you're not going to have good success with thread chasing, and that's walnut, that's oak, that's maple. Hard maple, there's an example. I have been successful in cutting threads with hard maple, but not the soft maple we have here in the South, the silver maple or the red maple. They just won't chase threads by hand at all. Here's some examples of various woods. I don't know what anybody would use these pegs for, but you know, it's something I play with where you tap a hole because you can't get a thread chaser in a hole that small. But then you come around and turn these pegs, and I was just I was just amazed at how easy it is to turn threads on a peg that you could fit into a tapped hole, and we've got everything from, you know, holly to mystery wood. I don't know what mystery wood. I think this is guatambu. You know, some kind of mystery wood. But most of these mystery woods, these are threaded at 20 threads per inch, and it's just really easy to make these little pegs if you needed little pegs or something like that for wood turning. Now, let me give you another alternative. I got this idea from a video by Alan Stratton some time back, where he had somebody that was a segmenter, and if you segment the wood with the grain running in this direction, side grain, the way you typically do it with all these segments being side grain, you can actually hand thread chase these. I did this by hand, 12 threads per inch on the outside just to check it out, and threads cut just fine. And this looks like it was probably soft maple, walnut, and Paduke, but it's all side grain. None of it is in grain. So you can make collars out of this. Now, we've talked about woods, but the other thing, you also, depending on what your project calls for, if you're making an urn, for example, you can cut the threads with you know, a hard a corian-like material, and they'll cut real well because it's dense, it's real tight grained. That's a joke. But it's a very consistent, hard, dense, and easy to thread chase, and you can do very fine thread chasing with this, easily 16 threads per inch. Plastic, I've made collars out of this for urns. This is easy to hand thread chase, 16 threads per inch. Like I say, Bradford pear, I've had good luck. Here's one where 10 threads per, 20 threads per inch and 16 threads per inch. Some of the threads don't look perfect; they crumbled a little bit, but sometimes they don't have to be perfect to work. So that's a thought. Now, generally, the wood needs to have several characteristics. Basically, it's got to be dense and close grained. Now, the one exception to that is, for example, is this Osage orange, because it has a very prominent grain. It's a ring. I forget what you call it, but anyway, it's got very prominent growth rings. But so it looks a little bit like maybe ash or oak in terms of real prominent grain. But the difference is the seasonal growth rings. The consistency and density of the wood in those throughout all the rings and all parts of the rings tend to be very homogeneous, of a consistent strength, and that's one of the problems you got with some of these other woods, such as oak or ash. So I'll find something to give you a try to give you a close up of ash and Osage orange and oak where you can see the prominent rings. But the problem with ash and oak is they're not the same consistent hardness, so you'll get what you call a drunken thread. As you're chasing it, it'll hit the softer part of the thread and jump forward a little bit, and then hit the hard thread and not go as fast. So it's just hard to get a good thread that won't crumble. Now, when it comes to exotic woods, or what one viewer call uranium-enriched wood because they're so expensive, that thread chase very well down to 20 TPI and smaller. The problem with them is, number one, they've got to be imported. They're expensive. In many instances, they're toxic. If you're not sure what I mean by toxic, check out my video on toxic wood. You need to protect yourself when you're using many of these exotics. In addition, many of these woods are on the endangered species list. So, you know, we want to use these woods wisely.